going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here, back with another pretty interesting video. Today I'm going to be talking about Shisui Uchiha, a very weird character in the context of the Naruto series, as there have been many variations of him and the circumstances surrounding his death with a lot of lore implications for the character strength-wise. So today, for the sake of discussion, I'll be using what I like to call composite Shisui. I'll be combining these mediums to give us an idea of what full power Shisui may have been like and how he stacks up against the likes of the Akatsuki. For anyone who's bothered by the fact that I'm combining mediums, I apologize, but not really. It's my video and I think it makes it more fun. And if you're super bothered by it, I don't know what to tell you other than you're probably playing Smash Bros with the indoor squad from SpongeBob. I don't know. The gang's all here at us. Anyway, let's get into the video. So starting off, let's talk about how strong composite Shisui would be. So I want to look at his encounters with Danzo in each medium first and foremost to see what narratives are being drawn here. In the game cutscene for Revolution, now to preface, I don't use Revolution as a scaling point for general stuff, but again, for Shisui, I'm going to make an exception here. In the game version, he forces Danzo to a standstill with his base Sharingan, forcing Danzo to jump and distract him with 5 Foundation Shinobi to steal Shisui's left eye. Shisui, after losing an eye and continuously getting pressed, inhales some poison gas, further inflicting physical strain on him. It's here he activates his Mangekyo, blowing away a portion of the forest and taking down 3 of the 5 Foundation members. Shisui's Susanoo has also shown the ability to unleash a barrage of chakra needles from its chest, while having its weapon of choice be a lance. In the anime version of events, Shisui negs Danzo instantly via Genjutsu and only gets surprise attacked into a combo via Danzo using Izanagi, which again isn't really that much of an anti-feat, as most characters, if not every character, which wasn't ready for Izanagi or able to sense it. Shisui's fire style also being impressive, as it cancels out with 4 Foundation Anbu using water style Raging Waves, so he has some pretty potent fire style, feat akin to Madara's fire style in the war, while obviously not being as severe. In the novelization of Shisui versus Danzo in their encounter, he probably gets done the most dirty, as Danzo is only able to steal Shisui's eye due to Shisui being poisoned from an Aburame Foundation member, which completely paralyzed Shisui's movements with its effects. After losing the eye, Shisui actually does body flicker away from Danzo while afflicted by this poison. The common thread here, aside from Danzo being a bitch, is that Danzo straight up can't beat Shisui in a straight 1v1 or doesn't even try and has some external factors at play, with Shisui even arguably being suppressed in the Revolution game, as well as he would not risk killing Danzo, a village elder, due to having already established tensions between Uchiha and Leaf, and it would be an instant breakout. So it'd make much more sense in that scenario for Shisui to be operating in a defense-oriented approach rather than going for the kill on Danzo. Common trend here is that, well, it seems Danzo can't just bolo big body Shisui without assistance, surprise attacks, or external advantages, with Shisui clearly being off-guarded or just not ready for the events that transpire. So it seems we can make a case that from the Danzo lore stuff, it seems that Danzo is somewhat of a relative to actually inferior to Shisui. So we kind of have to ask ourselves, okay, how strong is Danzo? I go into more depth on this in my Danzo versus the Akatsuki video. Check it out if you want. But I'll summarize it a bit here in that Danzo's actually pretty impressive in the fact that he's able to contend with and even tag Sasuke during the 5 Kage Summit, outside of Susanoo to even reacting to Sasuke's Susanoo at one point during the fight, this Susanoo being faster than even Sasuke himself. This is impressive when you consider the strength increase Sasuke goes through during this arc, whether you look at his base strength potentially increasing from having the MS or simply increasing via hatred. So point is comparable to Curse Mark Stage 2, at least in terms of chakra quality, his chakra becoming colder, being a direct indicator of his power maturing in the arc. The reason this is relevant is that the Danzo Shisui fights against, at least in some of the mediums, should still have access to Hashirama's cells in the same Senju arm that increases his physical energies and allows him to perform these feats against Sasuke, despite being comparable to Hiruzen in old age. I'm also of the opinion that Danzo had Izanagi and like the Sharingan on his arm, at least some of them, before the massacre. This is outright, shown to us with Danzo versus Shisui as he performs Izanagi. This is also supported when Sasuke confronts Danzo and asks him how he got the eyes on his arm, with Danzo saying through various ways. It's a long story, which, if you ask me, implies that it wasn't just the massacre itself. There was probably other areas, like for example in the 3rd or maybe 2nd Great Shinobi War, where he could have just pickpocketed them off the corpses of other Uchiha. I know Uchiha bring their Sharingan home, but there could be different ways. This also makes an extra degree of sense when looking at the fact that he was experimented on by Orochimaru, and he would have to leave the village and go meet up with Orochimaru after the fact to have like the Sharingan implemented, which isn't really supported with Orochimaru's conversation with Sai. He's like, Danzo, so that senile geezer's alive, like what does he want from me? So it seems their relationship was more so when both were in the Leaf together. I know that was a bit of a tangent, but the point I'm trying to make is that Shisui, from what we're gathering, shouldn't be that far off from Danzo himself or the Sasuke that was combating Danzo outside of his Susanoo, at least in terms of a conventional stat perspective. That's pretty much the only conclusions we can draw here. here. Shisui's arsenal is also pretty insane. If you want to look at his genjutsu, for example, in the anime, it's shown that he's able to control the minds of multiple opponents from a seemingly long distance. This is even with his Mangekyo, just his base Sharingan, with the range being so vast that Ao had to use his Byakugan to scan the forest forward to actually see who was using the genjutsu. The novelization of Itachi's story Midnight, Itachi and Shisui get absolutely bodied by an older Hyuga man named Mukai.
Hey yo, what the f?
Granted, this was with their base Sharingan until Shisui activates his MS, grabbing the intersection of him and Mukai's gaze that had lasted less than 1,000th of a second. With it being noted, a normal Sharingan more than likely wouldn't be able to capture the opponent under their genjutsu in this time, but for Shisui's Mangekyo, this actually was possible. I'll talk about Koto a little later in the video. That has its own section. Just bear with me. Shisui's body flicker is also pretty godly. For those who don't know, body flicker is a high-speed movement technique that many shinobi use to travel around with. It's closer to a short to long-term speed burst that most shinobi don't use in combat, with a few shinobi being able to apply it practically, with the technique also being used as a means of escape along with quick travel. A good example of this, for quick one, is Hanzo when he's about to get snatched up by Nagato's soul dragon. He body flickers and he's out. Shisui is among the few individuals to apply it with high levels of finesse and incorporate it into their fighting styles, along the likes of the 3rd and 4th Raikage, alongside the Yellow Flash himself, with Shisui even being touted Shisui the teleporter. We see in the anime that Shisui has honed the body flicker to such a degree he can seemingly create after-image clones. This is clarified to be Shisui himself teleporting around so fast he gives off the perception of clones, which each of these after-images containing mass and being able to strike the opponent, with the after-images themselves seemingly having little to no mass themselves. This essentially makes it that he can overwhelm most opponents while darting around to keep himself safe, and it seems as broken as it sounds. I want to talk about Shisui more, but we do have a pretty good idea of him, some solid hacks, a good arsenal, with him being more comparable to the likes of Danzo and like 5 Kage Summit Sasuke, arguably above or below depending entirely on some of your interpretation. This is just the range he's in. You cannot just make a distinct placement for him. Shisui should also be superior to, or at the very least on par to, Itachi with his base Sharingan compared to Itachi's base Sharingan, and obviously superior with his Mangekyo. But in terms of like base to base, again, you can gather this off the Revolution cutscenes, which I will get into more depth about when I discuss actually Shisui versus Itachi in the Akatsuki. So with that being said, let's get into the actual matchups themselves. Starting off, we have Hidan, and I mean, come on, let's be real here. Sure, we can say Hidan's gonna swing his scythe around, and I can make the same points most people have probably heard, with him swinging his scythe, having the worst aim and the slowest in the Akatsuki, yada 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 yada. But let's be real, judging by how Hidan is as a fighter, he's either gonna get absolutely slammed via body flicker decapitation or just basic genjutsu. Shisui's lore should also place him at a higher point stat-wise, so it's not as if like I'm being disingenuous to Hidan. No, this is just kind of overkill. Shisui has the hacks and raw stats to pull it off. So, I mean, Hidan is what Hidan does. He just loses in these matchups. I got him beating Tauntaun though. We're gonna put respect on Tauntaun. Next up, we have Kakuzu. Now, Kakuzu is actually very interesting to discuss because Kakuzu himself with Diamond Morph will be very difficult to damage, as we don't have any distinct AP feats for Shisui to say he'd be able to harm Kakuzu. And even if he does showcase lightning release, like for example, because on Shisui's data book bio, he has 3 nature releases, fire, wind, and lightning with yin release. But again, like, doesn't showcase any techniques with them, so I kind of have to go off what I'm given, so I can't really do that. So Shisui's fire style really shouldn't be enough to just blow through Kakuzu's Diamond Morph. I think that's extremely disingenuous to say. So now I will say, putting the Diamond Morph aside, right, because there is layers to it, because Kakuzu himself obviously becomes immobile when he fully hardens his body. He does the partial transformation. I've said all this before. This fight might actually not even get to Kakuzu's hearts, because he only really separates them when he gets hit with a Raikiri by Kakashi. He doesn't even have like he doesn't really think he like needs to bring them out against Shikamaru and Co. Kakuzu as a fighter does the very shonen trope of he like powers up as he loses the fight a little bit. So he fights base Shikamaru, he stays in base. Maybe you could argue he doesn't think Shikamaru's like worth his hearts. He gets hit with Kakashi's Raikiri. Okay, he loses a heart. He separates them from themselves and he fights with Hidan. And then he loses another heart, and then he starts fusing with them as his hearts start dying out. So it's like, okay, Kakuzu fights in such a fashion that he only gets stronger as he's losing. At least in character, that's what I'm saying. The reason I bring this up is because the Danzo to 5 Kage Summit speed tier should be above what Kakuzu's comparable to. Again, unless you think he's KCM 1 speed. As Heavy Sasuke post Orochimaru absorption is arguably stronger than this Kakashi, it doesn't really matter if you think so or not. The fact is they're very comparable, with 5 Kage Summit Sasuke and Danzo being a pretty distinct tier above that. I'm making it sound like there's tiers, but the bottom line I'm saying is that Shisui should be more comparable to a faster version of Sasuke, who should be faster than this Kakuzu. The reason this matters is, on top of Kakuzu himself maybe not potentially being able to tag Shisui, his hearts also aren't going to tag Shisui. I talk about this in every video with Kakuzu, but the only heart that's really threatening speed-wise is the lightning one, or Raiton, which Kakashi is able to react to. Ino and Choji are also able to react to some of the other hearts. It's like, okay, if Ino and Choji are reacting, you know, let's be real. But this is interesting because Shisui's actual only way to victory at this point is either to just Genjutsu Kakuzu, which I think is a bit of a slippery slope, because more often than not, a lot of these Akatsuki members would probably have some sort of Genjutsu countermeasure. Like, not everybody's gonna straight up look at an Uchiha's eyes, to be honest with you. And the fact that Kakuzu is this older than time shinobi who's just wandered around and collected jutsu would probably imply he does have a decent bit of experience. He's shown very wise. He's had a long history since fighting with Hashirama. That's also the Warring States period, or shortly after, where the Uchiha clan and Senju reign supreme. So Kakuzu does have some opportunity to overwhelm Shisui. It's basically kind of like the Fly versus the T-Rex scenario, where, like, okay, Shisui's jutsu may not be potent enough, and he's forced to undergo his best hacks with his Susanoo or Genjutsu, respectively. Now, I mentioned Genjutsu earlier, and that being he's able to capture his opponent in a thousandth of a second. Now, this was also being noted for Shisui's Mangekyo Sharingan, allowing him to sidestep the requirement of direct eye contact for Genjutsu to be initiated, with him being able to pour his chakra into the target despite their gazes not intersected. Granted, what I want people to understand is that he was generally discussing Kotoamatsukami in the conversation. The fact that he notes, though, that his Mangekyo lets him bypass all of this is insanely broken. Again, I'm going to talk about Kotoamatsukami at the end of the video, because that deserves its own segment and how broken it is. But Shisui actually doesn't have too much to damage Kakuzu, which is a big issue. He kind of has to force Kakuzu into these openings. He might get overwhelmed a bit by the hearts. Even though they're not too fast, he might be able to body flicker around. But it's not like he's going to be able to just break Kakuzu down with, like, his basic sword swings. If you don't go up the Genjutsu interpretation with him, like, negging Kakuzu, the Susanoo would definitely be necessary. But again, right, the problem with Shisui's Susanoo is that we know even then, like, it's harder to use because it's not especially fast. Like, it is and isn't, right? Because the Susanoo is consistently faster than the user. That's just the way it works. But then you have Foundation Anbu weaving away from his Susanoo attacks. Some of them do, some of them don't. And maybe you could say, like, okay, these Anbu don't really have any anti-feats, which I, will grant you. And maybe Shisui possibly being fatigued. It's still not a good look. And I don't know how comfortable I could say that, like, that Senbon Chakra attack, even if it did take down one of Kakuzu's hearts, if he was, like, in base, or just took down any of the hearts, there's actually a decent chance that Kakuzu might be able to outlast Shisui in this situation, just due to the fundamental nature of Shisui's MS techniques. I'm not pushing Shisui low stamina or anything like that, but you do kind of have to quantify his Susanoo. And I don't want to sit here and just say, oh, is it as strong as Sasuke's? Which is like, you can't really say that. But Susanoo is a possibility. So if I had to create a win con, probably Shisui's best option would be to, like, body flicker Genjutsu Kakuzu. And even then, like, it might be kind of questionable how his hearts interact with that. But just body flicker to force him to look into Shisui's eyes and use that mind controlling Genjutsu. Again, not talking about Koto, but the other variant. Or just attempt to overwhelm him with the Susanoo before he gets burnt out or, faces some potential Mangekyo drawbacks. So I think Shisui has a valid win con, but I actually do think you can make a case for Kakuzu. Ironically, just due to the nature of Shisui's lore. But I'll put it like this. Shisui does have the hacks to take down Kakuzu. It's just kind of how you swing it about. It's like, do you think Shisui's Susanoo is comparable to the likes of Kakashi's Raikiri? Shisui should have the speed here. And if you argue the speed aspect plus his Genjutsu hacks, that could be all you need. Or you think that doesn't really work on Kakuzu and he's forced to use the Susanoo and Kakuzu just kind of outstalls him and something like that? I'd probably lean towards Shisui just due to the hack speed, way of looking at it. But I will acknowledge that Kakuzu could overwhelm Shisui and force him to use up a lot of chakra quickly if the Genjutsu route doesn't really work. Because, again, not too much of Shisui's arsenal really works on Kakuzu otherwise. Next up, we have Deidara. Now, Deidara is interesting. I already mentioned the stat perspective, and we know Deidara is very relative, on par with that same Heavy Sasuke that I was mentioning earlier. Shisui should be coming in a bit more confident here, again, being closer to 5 Kage Summit Sasuke's caliber rather than Heavy Sasuke. Now, I will say here, in minced words, we did see how the Sharingan did counter some of Deidara's arsenal with the C4 and the chakra field being emitted. Along with this, we did see Sasuke constantly pressuring Deidara during that fight from a speed perspective, even tagging him in their initial encounter during the fight. But, Deidara also playing a ranged game, which did play into that. I won't sit here and say, like, Sasuke's way stronger than Deidara or something like that. Nah, it's an even fight. If he was that much stronger than Deidara, the fight wouldn't have been a high diff fight for him. Now, Genjutsu's interesting because Deidara's trained himself to see through Sharingan Genjutsu in preparation for his rematch for Itachi, but there's a couple layers to this because that Sasuke's Genjutsu shouldn't also be on Shisui's level. He actually reaches the peak of the Sharingan Genjutsu in the 5 Kage-sama as noted by the data book, which shouldn't be on the level of the Mangekyo Sharingan Genjutsu. Now, I know I'm also saying MS Genjutsu, but just having the Mangekyo Sharingan should elevate your level of Genjutsu. We saw this in B, right? Sasuke still uses his Mangekyo Sharingan to place people under Genjutsu. You could just make the case that it's a stronger variant of it compared to the normal Sharingan, which is consistent with the statements made about the Mangekyo in reference to the normal Sharingan. So I don't know how confident or comfortable I'd be saying that Deidara could outright just break through Shisui's Genjutsu in this case. I would also add I don't see a lot of Deidara's explosive really tagging Shisui in the same manner that they did with Sasuke. I also want to add for the Sasuke fight that Deidara did have the advantage of having Obito place the bombs in the ground for him. You could say he has a way to do this on his own, but that is something that aided him in that fight versus Sasuke, which wouldn't be present in a strict 1v1 situation. Even if he does go through the C2 Dragon and plays more of a ranged game, we actually do see the distance that Shisui's Genjutsu can go, and it is considerable. So you actually might be able to make a statement that Deidara's range might be mitigated, or he can force consistent misfires out of Deidara via body flicker and just creating the after images. Now, even though C4 is effective on Shisui, I don't think he's getting hit by it because the Sharingan just outright counters it pretty objectively. One of the better win cons, if I was going to argue for Deidara, is that he actually uses the C3 that he did on Gaara and attempts to nuke Shisui from a long range. However, that possibly gets into Shisui using his Susanoo to block it, so there is some wiggle room there. But Deidara, again, could actually pull a W here. He's a little lacking in the stat department and does have a tougher time against Shisui here. But because Shisui doesn't have like that right-on advantage that Sasuke had against Deidara, it shouldn't be too bad. It's just super dependent on if Deidara can take to the air and play the ranged game like he does against pretty much everybody else. Because if Shisui tries to run him down like Sasuke and doesn't get distracted, the fight's going to end a lot quicker. And Deidara, while feasibly having a W, it doesn't seem as likely to me. He might be able to C0 and tie it out. That's always something. But again, I don't even think the fight gets to that point necessarily. I think Shisui is a bit more in favor of him compared to Deidara. So kind of like the Kakuzu matchup, even though it's always feasible for these guys to win, Shisui is coming in pretty solid stat-wise and definitely has the hacks plus speed to pull a quick W. And it's very, I'll say this too, the reason I'm kind of leaning towards this is because this is very in character for Shisui from what we've seen. Like, he's going to just rush you down with Genjutsu or body flicker. It's one or the other. Now, for Sasori, the thing about Sasori when looking at this, I'll start off by saying this because Sasori is, like, always fun to talk about. I'm not going to cover the lore stuff for Sasori. I'm going to be real. If you just think, like, he scales to the war arc, then, you know, you can maybe just bypass this segment. It's just too much to talk about for one video. Regardless, I'd make the case he has a potential lore advantage over Shisui, but how you interpret Sasori's lore is obviously dependent. Now, I'll start by saying this. The problem with Sasori when looking at him versus Shisui is that the Sharingan is a pretty hard counter to Sasori, and it might not seem that way off first, but I want you to consider a couple of things. First and foremost, the Sharingan does allow the user to see the chakra threads that Sasori is using, which presents a big issue from it because it also does make his movements more apparent. On top of this, it would also allow Shisui to see the chakra dwelling at Sasori's core, which would also reveal Sasori, you know, not being a normal human a lot quicker as well. And again, the problem with seeing the chakra threads is that the Sharingan would allow the user to simply just cut the chakra threads. This is talked about in the Naruto movies a lot. Like, they have a lot of, you know, movie villains that straight up use mechs, and that's a big thing. Like, they'll cut chakra threads in the movies. But canon example is that Omoe is able to just cut Sasori's threads in the war arc with no chakra amping his blade. So the fact that Shisui is also just going to be able to see the threads all the time just makes it a bit harder for Sasori, and he might actually just be able to sever his connection to the third Kazekage puppet. Now, with that being said, Sasori is also very susceptible to poison. You know, we saw this with the Aburame stuff in the novel and how he does get poison. Sasori's poison being quite a bit step above any of that. the fact that it's also on all his grains of iron sand and all his weaponry does make it a bit tough for Shisui. Shisui's margin for error here is actually really small, and it gets more interesting when you look at his, when he starts body flickering around his after images, because you can really see some cool stuff in this match. We can see Sasori do the iron sand world order, just shoot out like the omnidirectional iron sand, trying to hit the real Shisui that's like after image and darting around. Defensively, Sasori should have no issues with, Shisui's attacks. The Iron Sand is just way too durable for anything we've seen for Shisui. I also don't think it's like that outlandish to say Shisui can get caught off guard, or, there can be poison scraping him, considering the fact that it is a common trend within his lore. This being especially prevalent if he doesn't have intel on Sasori, which he wouldn't. There's also a question of genjutsu and how that might affect Sasori. And this is very interesting because if you go off the standard definition of genjutsu in the series, when Jiraiya makes that explanation to Naruto, he talks about controlling the chakra through the cranial nerves of the opponent, which is located in the back of the brain, which is interesting because, Sasori doesn't really have a brain. He's more so just his consciousness and psyche are tied exactly to his core. I wouldn't say that makes him necessarily immune to optic genjutsu, since he does see and he still does have all 5 senses. A follow-up to hit maybe potential genjutsu countermeasures might be the fact that he has an Uchiha puppet when he does the 100 puppets against Sakura and Chio in the anime. So that might present something there. The fact that maybe this puppet body does allow Sasori to counter genjutsu in some metric. But he still does have chakra and at least, 2 of the 5 senses. So there is something to grab onto there. And the Sharingan is the best tool for this because it will reveal everything about Sasori's biology. Good how Sasori does use, what puppet users use. He does have to have a chakra circulatory system, which could be controlled via genjutsu. So there is a little bit of wiggle room here. I think it's interesting discussion, but I think there's enough to say that Sasori wouldn't be outright immune to it, but there's enough factors surrounding him that it would definitely make it harder to put him under genjutsu as compared to a lot of fighters. Along with this, the Susanoo itself would present some problems for Sasori, as his AP is a bit more questionable, unless you want to maybe say it's more potent than some of the sand Gaara uses in the War Arc. But even then, like, unless you're arguing for like Gaara and Shikaku that were like piercing through Madara that was playing around, I don't think there's a Gaara that has like that potent of a technique. At least compared to just straight up like ripping through, like let's say I use Sasuke's base ribcage from the 5 Kage Summit as like a metric at the very beginning of it. Even then, it's not like the Raikage was just slamming through it. Yeah, he was able to crack it to a degree, but he wasn't just like raw dogging through it. The Raikage, who should be more so comparable to Tsunade in strength, as they're the physical juggernauts of the Raikage, especially for maybe some anime stuff. But, going off all that, so it's definitely one of those interesting topics that's pretty debatable depending on the whole genjutsu micro point. That's always something. And the Susanoo itself, maybe rescale that. The lore implications for Sasori. I would make a venture to say that Sasori more than likely has superior lore to Shisui. Unless you think that Shisui is, for example, on par with like Itachi and the Akatsuki. Then you obviously, ignore what I said. I'm obviously basing this off of the 3rd Kazekage Rasa. Sasori potentially being comparable in the war.
Alright, I get it!
We all hear this. It's so annoying that I have to say this every video. You guys get what I'm saying? Take it if you want. If you don't, then Shisui would sweep. It's just kind of, the micro stuff. Plus the lore is a bit dependent. Whatever. You get what I mean. So, Sasori is Sasori. Then we have Orochimaru. Now, Orochimaru has a pretty bad track record when matching up against the Sharingan. I'll just be using Kyurzin fight Orochimaru. Now, on top of the Edo Tensei advantage, which would be very prevalent, turning this into more of a group matchup with Shisui having no real way to seal the Edos, already kind of putting him at somewhat of a disadvantage. The fact that he got overpowered by Itachi's base Sharingan is very telling in my opinion, genjutsu-wise, especially since Shisui should be comparable to this Itachi at the very least. Even Sasuke's base Sharingan, which hasn't fully matured or fully developed or has reached the peak of, was able to overpower the dimension that Orochimaru does, like the transfer ritual when he steals someone's body. So the Sharingan genjutsu, or like visual prowess, just is consistently not a good look for Orochimaru, which does mean a genjutsu neg is pretty possible in this situation. Now, if you want to be like a little more generous to Orochimaru, saying, he caught that L to Itachi, and he has from that point forward probably implemented Sharingan countermeasures to avoid a similar scenario from occurring. I think that's definitely more fair, just to say like genjutsu neg doesn't really seem fair with this version of Orochimaru. And I actually will say that if you don't go off the genjutsu neg argument, I can actually see a pretty good case for Orochimaru winning, due to the fact that even if you argued by some metric that due to Shisui's lore that he was faster than Orochimaru, it doesn't necessarily mean that he just wins, especially due to how Orochimaru is as a fighter with his regen, you know, body replacement, the Orochimaru style substitution, which avoided Amaterasu. So he has a pretty extensive arsenal. Now, with that being said, I don't really see like a lot of the mid-tier jutsu that these two individuals use. Like, I don't think Shisui's kunai or, you know, fire style are really going to neg Orochimaru. And I don't see this. I see a similar thing with Orochimaru's like grass longsword or any of his snake-based attacks. He also does have elemental jutsu, but again, that kind of gets into the speed aspect of this. Something I want to note, though, is that if Orochimaru does don his 8-headed Hydra form, he can straight up outlast and beat Shisui. Now, some people might be like, Susanoo kind of big body. But then when you realize that this is the same Orochimaru that was getting his Hydra form like sliced up, diced up, stabbed through his chest, and didn't really think much of it when facing Itachi. Verbatim states, just, this isn't enough to kill me. So when you kind of look at it in that light, and the fact that even though like Itachi did overwhelm Orochimaru with the Susanoo speed itself, he only really had such an easy time due to him having the Totsuka blade. The regular constructs of the basic Susanoo itself just wasn't enough to take down Orochimaru in this case, nor do I think it would. So I think it would be a similar case for Shisui, where Orochimaru would actually just be able to outlast him just by straight up fatiguing him out of the Susanoo, which out of all the MS techniques, it seems to have the most drawback, as it just, instead of like basic backlash via like, you know, headaches or like pain in the eyes, this hurts on a cellular level, as we saw with Sasuke. So there's something to that. And something I want to add for Orochimaru's Hydra too is that it's very possible that the Hydra form we saw against Itachi is not the full power Hydra form, due to the fact that he's only operating off the small amount of chakra that is being suppressed by Sasuke in the curse mark. And the reason I say it's a smaller amount is because when he's revived in a similar capacity in the war arc via Anko's curse mark, he notes that he just doesn't have the strength to really take down Sasuke or take any of their bodies, and does need to absorb his own chakra back from Kabuto, which lends the idea that if this was like full power Orochimaru, the Hydra form would probably be a step above in terms of strength. Now, how much more, I couldn't really say, but the fact that he's doing this well off the small amount of chakra present, I think it does say something to Orochimaru's power. So for this matchup, I think it's kind of like a Genjutsu neg, or Orochimaru just simply outlasts Shisui, as none of his other techniques really have enough, I don't want to say AP, but he doesn't have enough to like actually put down Orochimaru. And Orochimaru has shown the capacity to kind of like contend with these like higher, he doesn't mind going the distance with the Susanoo itself. So that should kind of tell you where this guy lies in regen. Next up we have Kisame. Now Kisame is pretty interesting. By the way, someone commented that I say interesting a lot. I'm going to start putting a counter in this video for how many times I say that. That's not a good thing. But regardless, when you consider his relationship with Itachi, it's pretty objective that Itachi's stronger than Kisame. This is stated in the data books, along with being, you know, you get the vibe from it when you look at the two. Like when Itachi says jump, Kisame says how high. This is also supplemented with the Canon's Generation cutscenes of Itachi and taking on Kisame, with Kisame conceding the bout the minute Itachi pulls out his MS. Also does supplement this a bit more. Granted, it was a sparring match, but Kisame was painted as the inferior in this altercation compared to MS Itachi. There's a couple ways to approach this one. If you're under the interpretation that Kisame is below the Sannin tier, with that, you know, if you think that's remaining consistent in Shippuden with no power jumping Kisame, with a fresh MS Itachi being able to dominate Orochimaru with his base Sharingan, that could be something. Although, you know, traveling with Itachi would definitely make Kisame aware of the Sharingan with potential countermeasures, considering he thought he could spar with Itachi. So basic Genjutsu on Kisame, I feel like that's kind of not fair, but you know, I'll keep with the same narrative that if he can get it off, you know, that is something. Shisui is also not the type of fighter Kisame wants to fight, as you have someone like Minato who isn't this chakra juggernaut. No, this is someone with good hacks and speed to take you down, which is not ideal for Kisame. Kisame does possess the elemental advantage, at least when viewing Shisui's fire style. I want to say this is the type of fight where Kisame just shoots out large amounts of water, makes some water clones, but more often than not, I think there is a good chance he might be susceptible to Shisui's arsenal with maybe some body flicker movement into a possible Susanoo or Genjutsu. And I don't want to repeat myself, but, you know, these two shouldn't be in entirely different tiers when looking at the Danzo stuff and Sasuke himself during Shippuden. Like, if Kisame actually does flood the area and forces Shisui underwater, there's not going to be too much he can really do. It's just that Kisame does find, like Itachi and the MS techniques Itachi exhibits, extremely powerful and does show a lot of respect for them. Shisui, as he fights, does seem to be more of a slippery fighter, and there isn't these large amounts of chakra for Kisame to just jump on. It also doesn't help the fact that Kisame is more comparable to like base to version 1 Killer B. Killer B himself is like, he deserves his own video as well, because like there's a lot that goes into when you scale Killer B. I'm not gonna lie, and a lot of people just blow a lot of stuff he does out of proportion, while a lot of the other stuff he does is just pretty crazy. But I think this fight is kind of similar to the Kakuzu one, where it just kind of ends off rip with Shisui's W, or Kisame has the opportunity to force Shisui into a lot of disadvantageous situations. Like obviously if he's underwater, for example like the water dome forms, his Susanoo is not really gonna help him. Like what's he gonna do? You know, shoot an attack underwater where like fuse Samehada Kisame is faster. So this should be an all or nothing fight for Shisui, just like, you know, potentially Kakuzu in this tier. With it being possible Kisame can pull a W off, with him also arguably having some more solid scaling, maybe his 30% clone, you know, forcing a guy into the 6th gate. You know, the 7th gate guy stuff, he was amped up on B's chakra, so maybe you could say that's not full power. Or, you know, he's at 50%, or he's not able to use all his techniques because Samehada is not there. You get what I'm saying. So this one, like some other matchups, is just kind of all or nothing. Next up, we have Itachi. Now, there's a problem with, you know, Itachi. I talked about this briefly, but, you know, Shisui should be on par to Itachi, or a rival, possibly superior to Itachi pre-MS. This essentially means that that's where Shisui caps out against Itachi. In terms of like any conclusions you can make. Itachi would go through the Uchiha massacre, awaken his Mangekyo Sharingan, have all this anguish that would increase his visual dojutsu. So there's no real way to say objectively that Shisui could be stronger than Itachi. This also isn't aided by the fact that Itachi and Pain are still stronger than 5 Kage Summit Sasuke and Naruto. So it's not as if any conclusions drawn from the Danzo or Sasuke stuff really help here either. Both users have MS, so just negging each other with their Genjutsu just doesn't really happen here, since defensively they should be comparable when getting into that dojutsu battle. So he's not going to pull up in base Sharingan Itachi, obviously. This is also probably the case for Itachi. Ironically, body flicker is probably going to be a greater asset to Shisui, as even though he's more than likely not as strong as Itachi, it might allow him to pretty much stay out of Itachi's range in terms of like his Mangekyo dojutsu and Mangekyo techniques such as the Amaterasu. But like, that's it. Like, nothing Shisui has is, I don't want to say better than Itachi, but, you know, yeah, he may potentially have some sort of speed edge if you want to maybe say the Koto stuff, but even if you went into like a possible Susanoo battle, right? Itachi would still absolutely just wash his Susanoo, as he'll have an edge in terms of maintaining the technique, as even when they have comparable nerfs, and I know that's kind of like a blanket statement, but essentially Shisui loses an eye and is poisoned, and he's not really able to maintain the Susanoo at all, and Itachi's like dying.
My brother used to break in our house and steal the TV. But now he's dead.
On his deathbed and able to maintain the Susanoo with like no dojutsu at all. And he still seemingly maintains it for longer. So in a battle of attrition, I'm also pitching for Itachi. But this is also not discussing the spirit weapons. Yadamir is just slapping away that little lance, the chakra beads, none of that. He's just slapping that away. Totsuka Blade is also pretty definitively a GG as well. And again, this is the problem with Shisui, right? You can never say how much faster he is than somebody. And you just have no way to say, oh, is he going to body flicker through the Totsuka Blade? Is he that much faster than Itachi's full power Susanoo? I don't think so. I also want to add, even if you go into the nature of Itachi's nerf while he's alive, for example, right? In the, let's say I use like a Sasuke fight Itachi, even though his visions, you know, you see his visions blurred out a little bit, and you could probably tell his like visions degrading over time, so he's not able to, you know, perceive events as accurately. You're just never able to say how much weaker that Itachi is because he's sandbagging that fight so hard. So generally speaking, Shisui doesn't have anything Itachi doesn't have, and from a lore stat perspective, Itachi should also be coming in better, along with having an objectively better avatar than Shisui's. And it might be different if like Itachi made some sort of statement, you know, talking about himself and Shisui, but again, Shisui doesn't really, all we know is that he's above just base Sharingan Itachi. Anything else is just up to interpretation. So Itachi should take this one. Next up is Konan, who's a little weird just due to the dance of the Shikigami, making her kind of hard to hit. Like, for example, Shisui's fire style is just never tagging her if Jiraiya's isn't, regardless of how potent you have, and it's not like Shisui has any like oil-based attacks to really tag Konan. Even if he is faster, she's just gonna dissolve through everything. That is just her fighting style. Now, I will say this, the way Konan operates does make it harder to place her under Genjutsu. This is why Obito doesn't just outright neg her with the Sharingan, because she's very difficult to find and make eye contact with. The only time he actually does this is when she's out of chakra and can't use the technique anymore. So she actually does have a good matchup just against conventional Genjutsu. Does that mean she's immune? No, she's still a human being. She can get caught on it just like anybody else, but the way she fights does kind of prevent that from happening. Her paper bombs blowing off Obito's arm is just equally as impressive. There's nothing to suggest Shisui would be able to tank. He has no real durability feats. I mean, granted, you can make a case like, you know, depending on how you want to go, that he has no anti-feats either. But to say it's on the level of Obito, I think would be a stretch. Shisui's body flicker doesn't really make too much of a difference because Konan's a very ranged fighter with her paper bombs, and she'll be able to just, you know, blow up the surrounding area. It really won't make too much of a difference. Even Shisui's Susanoo, ironically, doesn't really give him an edge, because even if he pulls up a defense and is able to block Konan's blows, it's not like the chakra needles that he throws out or like the Susanoo lance is just going to tear apart the paper that Konan's using. She'll actually be able to continuously stay away and just range out Shisui. If she actually does kind of go at it with a similar approach like how she does against Obito, where she just runs in and like almost tries to blow herself up with Obito, there is a good chance Shisui's just getting negged in that situation, unless he does feint her into like a body flicker variation, which could be something. I think his main attribute here though is that he kind of has to force Konan into using or just getting caught under his Genjutsu and for him to manipulate her, which might be possible if she underestimates the range of his Genjutsu, as we do see it can reach very far. So there is a lot to that. And you know, maybe you could say, like, you know, in terms of like the dance of the Shikigami, he might be able to overwhelm it with the Susanoo, but I just don't see it. It's not like a huge chakra-based attack, which might overwhelm her ability to dissolve. Even if she gets tagged, I think it's highly questionable. So it's kind of like, I know I'm saying this a lot in the video, but it's just kind of like fundamentally how it operates. Shisui kind of has to do an all or nothing again in this situation, as if Konan kind of plays too long range and forces him to use up too much chakra, it'll just be it, and she'll just eventually blow off his limbs with the continuous long range paper bombs. Pretty much has to body flicker, force her to like materialize, which she won't, or he has to straight up body flicker Genjutsu, which is also very possible. So Konan versus Shisui, again, kind of a debatable one. I think it's a little bit interesting. Depends on how you go somewhere with a couple of these. Next up is Pain. I'm gonna be honest, I think Pain stomps. Now, you know, I'm of the opinion Pain is above anybody in the Kage Summit, at least individually. I think full power Pain would be above all of them. I'll talk about this more in some other videos, but the Naruto that was doing well against a pretty heavily fatigued Pain is comparable to a Sasuke who's doing very well even in a weaker state in the Kage Summit, and Pain should be above both those fighters. Even at the beginning of the summit with a more fresher Sasuke, Obito like makes note that Sasuke still isn't at Nagato's level. He's like, even if Sasuke surpasses Nagato. So Pain should be above any of that. So should Itachi. The only potential argument, counter interpretation I could see is maybe off the Raikage. But even then, and that's a bundle of like laughs to talk about, because a lot of people just swing it one way or the other and oversimplify the matchup itself. So I'll just acknowledge it's there. Like there is something to that. Maybe. Not really. But anyway. Now, I'll put it like this. Itachi should be stronger than Shisui while he's in the Akatsuki. And Pain versus Itachi is a very heavily debated topic. Now, I'm not going to just swing one way or the other, but the fact that Pain is more comparable to Itachi. And on a narrative note, Naruto and Sasuke only really fight nerfed versions of Itachi and Pain. So it's kind of not looking good to Shisui. Now, I will say, you know, let's put the dojutsu stuff aside, because that's also, you know, a lot of these arguments kind of do get into Itachi versus Pain. I'm gonna slide on the Genjutsu point for a second, because it's fundamentally a little more difficult to discuss how the, you know, Sharingan Genjutsu affects the Rinnegan. I'm of the opinion the Rinnegan is way more impressive than the Mangekyo Sharingan from a lore and stat perspective, even chakra discussion. Now, that's generally speaking, because obviously there's exceptions to the rule, like Obito with his insane MS, all of that. So let's shelve that for a second. Now, this is kind of cool, because there's I will say, like, I could definitely see Shisui getting overwhelmed very quickly. He's going to have a lot of tough time here, because there's a lot he can't counter in this fight that like someone like Itachi could. For example, the Animal Path. When he stacks the jutsu that replicates the dog onto the dog and it replicates, Shisui can't bypass that. There's a lot he's going to be getting hit with. All these summons, the Asura Path running at him, the Diva Path, just like Bansho Tenin and Shinra Tensei. And, you know, there is a lot of micro stuff here. Like, okay, what if Shisui body flickers and does, like, you know, like he kind of gets hit with a Shinra Tensei Shockwave Does all his after images get blown away, or do they do something cool? Like they just kind of stand at like near him and just, you know, they don't really have mass like that. And the thing about Shisui's body flicker that's interesting is that the Anbu that's like fighting him notes he can't sense where Shisui is. And I want to make note that the Rinnegan actually does have some pretty busted sensory capabilities. Pain's actually able to just straight up look at the barrier surrounding the hidden leaf. He's able to accurately assess. There's pretty much like a sensory mode. It's when Pain's pupils go a little wider in the manga. He's able to perfectly assess how much Sage Mode Chakra Naruto has left, or that it's run out completely. So there might be a decent case that the Rinnegan might also just sense where the real Shisui is as well, along with the fact that he's charging up a Genjutsu, since I know Nagato could actually sense when Itachi was getting ready to use techniques with his Mangekyo Sharingan, so it doesn't seem that outlandish that it'd be a little different for Shisui. So his sensory capabilities are actually pretty impressive. And like, I could sit here and try and make some arguments, but honestly speaking, I think just Shisui gets overwhelmed. I don't want to sit here and just like try and grandstand a case for Shisui when I don't think there's really anything to that. Even the Susanoo, like, right, if you go off feats, like if these basic Anbu are dodging it and Shisui's not really able to maintain it that long, granted he's nerfed, it's just like, okay, even if he takes out a Path or Pain or two, you know, what does it really do for him? And even then, like, Pain can just Shinra Tensei the Susanoo away with Shisui inside, and they'll both go flying. I don't even have to bring up Chibaku Tensei or any of that. I think Pain's just kind of dominating in this situation. All it really takes is, like, one Chakra Rod. And again, the Genjutsu point is so deep that I'm just gonna... I don't want to cover it in this video because I've covered it in other videos. But if you're of the opinion that, like, looking at one of the Pains would just, like, hit them all with Genjutsu and, like, flashbang over to Nagato, then that's probably Shisui's only saving grace. Otherwise, man, there's just nothing. Like, he's gonna get overwhelmed and chakra fatigued so quickly, or just tagged and blown away. So this is I don't really have to explain, like, Pain's, like, large-scale arsenal because it's so much. Compared to what? Like, a sword and fire style? Like, let's be real here. So I think Pain should dominate this one. Next up, we have Obito. And, I mean, I think Obito washes. To be honest, like, nothing Shisui has is really going to affect him. Even Kodo arguably wouldn't even make a difference here due to how Obito had zero fear of it when Danzo utilized it. Granted, you can make the case this might be a different version of variant, or like a different, even though like Shisui's also listed under a user of the same data book as Danzo, that his Kodo might operate fundamentally different because it's a different eye. But even if you didn't, and you could argue a couple things, like maybe Obito would have Izinagi'd, like, if he picked up something might have been wrong, or like initiated the technique since he can use it for like 5 to 10 minutes straight. But again, this dude just didn't care. So like, is Obito hiding the sauce? Like, what happened? But yeah, no, either way, you know, from a stat perspective, Obito would just wash, instant BFR. There's just nothing Shisui could really do to overwhelm him. This is the Kotoamatsukami section of the video. Now, the reason I refrained from discussing Kodo is that you could make a valid case that most, if not all, the Akatsuki would be susceptible to it. And Shisui would hit them all with the Naruto, we're not that different, bro, and convince them not to fight. Or he could do something similar to what he does in the novel and just force them to attack themselves or leave themselves vulnerable. And just due to this technique fundamentally operating way quicker, Shisui being able to spam it, if you kind of give it to him, okay, he really doesn't have too much trouble with a lot of these members. Like with Kodo, you can make a decent case Shisui might just skyrocket to the top 3. The fact Kodo isn't really sensible by most members, if not all the members of the Akatsuki, and it took Ao with like a Byakugan to recognize it, and like knowing Mifune's behavior and like that something was up, it just kind of clips a lot of fighters. So Kodo would more than likely rip into everybody except maybe arguably the top 3, because those are kind of their own micro conversations. But like, for example, Itachi should be susceptible if the MS Sasuke is. Obito is a bit questionable. Pain might be, this might be more likely due to the MS being far more potent than like basic Sharingan. I could definitely see a case. Multiple times more potent, in fact, via the novel. So, you know, kind of going off all that, Kodo just kind of makes Shisui that much stronger. But it also ends a lot of these discussions quicker, so I just kind of left it as its own segment. But for any of my guys, just the fact that Shisui can spam this is ridiculously broken. Just imagine him spamming this with body flicker. Yeah, it's not too hard to see why he's not, you know, really stoppable. And why he was kind of a walking plot device. In fact, I think Obito would have actually used his eye before the Rinnegan to accomplish some stuff, as he was kind of it wasn't upset, but he did want Shisui's eye. And, you know, he wants the eye to use it, obviously. So I think there is something to that. How he would have used it, we don't know, or for what purpose. But that's my own personal headcanon. So Kodo, Shisui, probably top 3. If he doesn't have Kodo, I think it's a bit more debatable where he gets placed in the Akatsuki due to how fundamentally he is a fighter and how a few of these people interact with him. But that's the video. Let me know if you guys enjoyed. I sure did. You know, let me know your thoughts down below. Where would you put a composite Shisui? if you had to actually like rank him on the Akatsuki, would he be 4th strongest, 5th strongest? Like,
Now get out!